Hello, Faith family, and welcome back to another episode of A New Creation, True Life Testimonies. I am your host, Vanessa Moore. I'm super excited for my next guest. I actually met them at my church in Manhattan just about 2 years ago, I'd say. Both of them are filmmakers with a beautifully riveting story. And so they're here to share what God has done in both of their lives, welcoming father and daughter, Robert and Kristi Kollar.
Hi.
Thank you.
Hello, friends.
Hi.
You also will probably hear Addie in the background.
Hi, Addie.
My
How old is
granddaughter.
Addie? Yeah. How old is she now?
She is 2.5. She'll be 3 in July.
Amazing. I knew her when she was just, how old was she? A couple of months old?
Yeah, something like that, like 3, 4 maybe.
Yeah. Pretty amazing.
I remember you picking her up out of the baby stroller, and she was just 2 months old. She was just looking at you like, "What are you doing with me?" But she was always happy to see you. I remember that.
I know. I do remember that. It was quite a wonderful time. Well, Robert, maybe let's start with your story, because it kind of leads into yours, Kristi, and then leads into little Addie's. So
Sure.
I guess take it from the beginning.
Okay. Well, Kristi wanted me to start anyway, so I'm really happy to be here. And this is such an honor whenever we are called to talk about anything to do with what God did in our lives. It's just, it'll bring tears to my eyes, so I'll just warn you ahead of time. And I feel that I'm a very blessed man. My daughter's 21 years old, and she and my granddaughter are living with me. And she's not in a hurry to run away from me and go live somewhere else. She still likes hanging around with her dad. So that's pretty cool. My life, I grew up Hollywood lifestyle, Malibu Beach, Hollywood, surfing, the late 60s, early 70s. It was a wild time, in Southern California. All my friends smoking pot. We ditched school. We got into drugs like acid, led to cocaine, everything. Anything that came around, we got into it. And it turned out that I had a bit of a addictive personality. So all my dreams of going pro surfer and everything kind of, got washed out already before I even turned 18. And, I had a belief for somehow, I just believe if I would just quit doing what I was doing to myself, that God would make my life good. But I didn't know how to do that. I had the idea that he would make my life good, but I didn't know how to let him do that. I didn't know God like I know him now. I believed there was a God. He was the boss, and he was not me. I was not God. That's all I knew. I didn't know really who Jesus was, what the word in the Bible was. I wasn't raised by a Christian family. We had a Bible in our house, and I think it just sat on a shelf. So I had no concept of who or what God was, or why I was constantly on a path of wrecking my life. I'd have these moments of hope. I do really well. I excelled in all the arts, acting and photography and music and things like that fascinated me, but I couldn't take it to the next level. And I got in a lot of trouble in my life, legal trouble, all about drugs. And that went on for years. I would employ myself in Hollywood, in various places of production or acting and films or television. And it was just a nothing life. And basically, I was 40 years old. And this had gone on since 17, age 17, 40 years old, and nothing got better. And I just had enough. And I just thought, maybe LA is my problem. So I just decided to leave. A big film deal I was involved with blew up. And it was just one of those, oh gosh, not again. I never want to work in this town again feeling. I blamed everybody but me, and went out on the road, ended up going to Wyoming just because my sister lived there. And I figured it was around the time of Thanksgiving. I'd spend Thanksgiving there, and car broke down and ended up staying there. And soon enough, I found out that I brought me with me wherever I went. My problems in California turned out to be my problems in Wyoming. Mm. And then I thought, man, I just need one more time, another new start. And somebody told me, oh, you ought to go up to Montana. It's just like Wyoming, beautiful and peaceful and all that. But they got a great film school up there at the state university. And there'll be more people that you could relate to. So I did that, but I brought myself there too. And all of a sudden, something happened where I got a letter in the mail in Montana from Child Services. And it said that I was being accused of having a 3-year-old daughter. And I thought, well, how can that be? Now, by this time, I did quit using drugs. God helped me do that, even though I still wasn't a believer or saved. I just was praying a lot. God, help me do something right. That was all my prayer was. I didn't have friends that were Christians or anything. I just was on my own. But I got this letter, and so I was curious. Like, I have a 3-year-old daughter, and I thought it must be a big mistake, but what if it wasn't? And I went back to where that letter came from, drove through the mountains. It came from Salt Lake City, of all places. I was in Bozeman, Montana. Went there, and I just said, hey, I'm this guy. What am I supposed to do? And they were surprised because they look for deadbeat dads, don't expect them to walk in. And so I made friends that day and didn't even know it because of my willingness to do something right. And I still didn't get to meet Kristi yet. That's, and but God led me to take some actions that eventually I got to meet Kristi and the woman that was the mother. Now that woman that was the mother, I talk about her like that right now. It's probably not the best way to talk about her, but she was somebody else's wife when I met her, and I didn't know it. They were throwing me a going away party in a bar in Wyoming because I was moving to Montana, and I was drunk. And somebody introduced me to this beautiful young lady. And after 14 shots of tequila, or however many I had, next thing I knew, it was the next day and she was at my house. No one told me she was somebody else's wife. She didn't tell me that. But the next day, somebody else told me that after she was gone. And I just went, wow, I know that's not good. The only good thing about that was, oh, well, it's a good thing I'm moving to Montana next week. And so 4 years later, I get this letter. And I knew it was her, even though I got confused. That was in Wyoming, and the letter came from Utah. I don't know why, but that's just how it went. Mm-hmm. Well, her name's Melinda, and she finally called because I requested, and I sent money, and I sent a letter, and the social workers forwarded that letter, and I got an opportunity to meet Kristi for the very first time. She was living in a horrible place. A horrible place. I had cleaned up, sobered up, but I've been in better looking crack houses in East LA than where she was living. She was malnourished. She was 3 years old, malnourished. Her skin had a green tint to it. Mm-hmm. And I knew right then that what little I knew about God, that He wouldn't give me a daughter if there wasn't going to be a solution how to help her. And I didn't know how to help her. I'd never had any parenting experience. I'd never been married. I didn't know how to do anything right. I barely knew how to take care of my dog. So this was a challenge. And that's what led me to cry out to God. I said, God, you have to do this for me. I don't know how. You have to show me. Next thing I know, somebody that I did know in Montana turned out to be a Christian. I didn't know it before, but he always talked about the Bible. And I finally said, you always mention the Bible. What's this about the Bible? Tell me about the Bible. And he started my first Bible studies with me to a point where it was really starting to make sense to me. I was understanding. I was seeing the stories in the first 5 books of Moses. I was seeing the Israelites like movies in my head. It was becoming real. And I wanted I wanted more. I wanted more. And then I remember interrupting this guy one time. I said, aren't I going to get baptized or something? Seems like I heard that people like this get baptized. I said, I want to get baptized, but I don't want to go to one of those churches. I've seen people in those churches, and I don't want to be like them. And he laughed and said, sure. And sure enough, I got baptized. And next thing you know, I wanted to go to church and fell in love with the church. And my daughter, by this time, it was her situation with her mother and her family was getting worse rather than better. And I finally went to a lawyer, and I didn't even have the money for this, but God blessed me with a lawyer that also turned out to be a Christian, and she represented me, and we ended up winning full emergency custody. And it was just amazing. So then I suddenly had a daughter I was caring for. She's now, by this time she was 7 years old. And I'm like, what do I do now, God? She wants to eat food every day. And, and I didn't know how to be domestic. And so God just, He took over our life. I managed to somehow put her in a private Christian school because she was really smart and wanted to go there. She was a straight A student. Somehow every month I paid the bill for that. I don't know where the money came from. It just went on and on and on, and God just continued to bless us and grow us. And next thing you know, that church that I never wanted to go to suddenly became our church. It was our home. We loved it. We served there. We were served there, and we did it. We started our own ministry programs. We got support, and we just grew. And by the time Kristi was 15 years old, we got back. I got back in the movie business. I got to take her out of school for 3 months, and we went to Burma. And we researched a movie that we want to do there and made a trailer about it, and we still want to. I took her to Hollywood to try to get backing for the movie. And then those people, I met Christian filmmakers there. I never knew there was a Christian film industry. And they had us tell our testimony, the story I just told you. And they said, why don't you make a movie about your story? And I said, no. I don't want to do that. The same kind of no I had that I didn't want to go to church. No way. To me, that was like putting your dirty laundry out on the lawn for the neighbors to see. I thought, no way. Well, sure enough, a lot of people talked us into it, and we made our movie, and I called it Take Two. Second chance. God gives second chance. A film director getting a second chance at life. Action, take one, take two. Kristi, a new chance at a healthy life. We're living for the Lord now. It was just a total new life. And we made a movie called Take Two, and it's out in distribution right now.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And the story even continued after that movie. Now it's Kristi's turn to talk. I mean, she's now 17 years old and about to graduate her high school. She turns 18 years old, and now there's another, what seems to be a wrench in our story. But I'll just fast forward to the end of that. God had different ideas. Kristi?
Well, yeah, I mean, I feel like the amount of things that happened in my childhood were enough to like fit into one lifetime. But we can just keep finding more things to talk about, I guess.
Mhm.
After growing up in this church, actually, that he just described as our home, we were really involved in church, really involved in school, and we were just there for everything. We're very, very dedicated to both of those places, and it was just we were in a really good place in our life. We finished our film and all this stuff, and then all of a sudden it was like a million different things happened at once that were all unexpected. So the first thing was that we got told that we were renting a house in Montana, and the landlord had died, and his son had acquired it, and they decided to sell it. So we got told, after living there for most of my childhood, and for him 20 years, that we were going to have to move in 30 days. And so that was right after, like the day after we premiered our film. So it's like automatically from high to low. And so we looked and we found this really nice place that we were going to move into. We were really excited about it, actually. We went through the move, got all our stuff moved into the garage mostly, other than a few things because we hadn't fully unpacked. And then we had lived in it for 4 hours, and then it caught on fire.
Unreal.
Fire. So it burned. We couldn't live in it, obviously. So that was a big mess. That was, strike number 2, I guess, having to move. And then the place we moved in, we didn't even get to sleep there for one night.
Wow.
And then we were in the middle of winter in Montana, and people don't rent in winter in Montana because it's really hard. The snow is really difficult to deal with. And so we were kind of stuck with nowhere to go for a while. We were looking actively, but couldn't find anyone willing to rent yet. So we, at first couple nights, stayed in a motel, and then a friend of ours gave us a little tiny camp trailer. We parked it in the driveway of the burnt down house, and we lived there for months. Like, it was just, for most of winter.
And the door didn't shut.
Yeah, the door didn't shut all the way, so we had to bungee cord it. And that's how I started my senior year of high school, and did a lot of my senior year that way. And then after that, a friend of ours from church, a family, they had a condo that their family would stay in when they'd come up for holidays and such. And their family wasn't occupying it for a little while, so they let us stay there until like Thanksgiving, Christmas. And so we went and we stayed in the condo, which was really nice. But then we found out that my grandma had cancer. Around that same time, my grandpa, who was living in Germany, fell and broke up like a good half of his body. So he had to go to Germany to take care of him, to help him recover. And so I was, there. And was still, of course, trying to go through senior year, not quite settled, haven't found a place yet. And then one night I went to a dance, and my ride home decided not to let me out of his truck, and I was assaulted. And so we were in the middle of so much going on in our life, and normally I feel like I can tell my dad anything. But there was so much stress and so many scary things going on, and I could just see him, dealing with both his parents, trying to find a place for us to live, and all these other things, and I just felt like I couldn't put one more thing on him, because I was so stressed too for him and all the things that he was going through. Plus, he was having some medical stuff going on too. So I was just really worried about him in general, and I just felt like I can't lay one more thing on top of him. And so I kept it a secret, and it felt awful because, like I said, I feel like I can tell my dad everything. And we have a really close relationship, so it was a very, really hard time for me. And I'm going to school and church, and I didn't want to tell anyone else because I wanted the first person I told to be my dad. And every time that I felt like it was a better time to tell him, something else would go on, some new advance in his medical stuff, or in my grandma did eventually die from the cancer, and all this stuff. We ended up having to stay in, or he ended up having to stay in Germany for a long time, longer than we were expecting. So I actually flew up there and joined him for a while, and it was just high stress there too. And we finally did find a place to live. We were actually in Germany when we signed the papers. We hadn't even seen the place, but it was our only option. And then we came back and dealing with all this different stuff, and it was just, like I said, like one thing after another, just piling and piling. And so for 7 months I was pregnant, and no one knew. And so many times, like I said, I just wanted to tell him it, and then something else would happen.
She stayed tiny.
Yeah, I was also really small. I didn't look pregnant at all. So what happened was, it got to the point where I was, a month off from graduation, and I just thought, well, I'll just graduate and then I'll deal with it, because at this point I just need to focus on that and all this stuff. And I started sending out graduation invites, and I just felt God telling me that I should send one to my mom. And I hadn't talked to my mom in 11 years, and I hadn't seen her, and I had no real form of communication with her. She'd occasionally send like a birthday or Christmas present, but that was it. In the beginning, we tried to have phone calls. My dad was trying to keep us connected, but she wouldn't cooperate. It was all, every time I would talk to her, it was just her talking to me for a half hour about how horrible he was, so it was just a big mess. And so we eventually just stopped talking, and I just felt God telling me to send her a graduation invite, and I just figured it was because she, that's a thing that a mom's supposed to know about. I didn't think anything else of it, so I did it, even though I didn't know why. And 3 weeks before my graduation, my friend at school, who was a teacher and my play director, who I spent a lot of time with because I was doing theater a lot, she started to take notice and questioning if I was pregnant. And she hadn't wanted to say anything to me if I didn't feel comfortable talking about it and stuff, so she didn't bring it up to me right away. And also, in the midst of all this, before the assault, I had applied to college in New York, and I got accepted. It was my dream school, and so that was going on too. And so one day she just talked to my pastor of my church, who was also the head of the board at the school, and asked him if I might be pregnant. And he said, I don't know, he hadn't taken any notice. Like my dad said, I was really small. Mm-hmm. And so he called my dad, and I remember that day we were in our house, and I was in the kitchen, and I remember the phone ringing, and I just knew what the phone call was going to be. I just knew it. And so he picked up the phone, and he stepped outside because he had asked my pastor to talk to him privately. And so I just went into my room, and I sat down on the floor by my bed, and I just waited for him to come in. And I didn't know what to expect because, like I said, my dad and I are really close, and so I trusted him a lot, and I knew that he wouldn't do anything like awful, but like, so it wasn't that kind of fear, but it was just like more fear of disappointment, and especially because I hadn't told him. And so I was just waiting. And after a while, he came in my room, and I just remember the first thing he said to me was that he loved me and that he was really proud of me. And he started telling me how proud he was of me over and over, and he didn't even mention the pregnancy for a while. He was just making sure I knew that he loved me and all of that, and nothing I could do would change that. And then he started telling me about this commercial he had seen. It was like a Subaru commercial, and we really like Subarus. But it was this mom who was pregnant, and she was like showing her baby the world while she was still pregnant, being like, this is the ocean, and and it was really cool. And he was telling me all about this, and talking about how, like, with pregnancy, it's supposed to be like this really amazing time of your life, and it's not supposed to feel shameful. It's supposed to be something you're proud of. And
that commercial just really touched me. I have no idea why. I didn't know anything about this yet, but that commercial just really touched me of the beauty of being pregnant.
Yeah. And so we talked about it, and I told him I was pregnant and that I was 7 months along and hadn't seen a doctor because the guy who had assaulted me was not willing to take me, and I wasn't telling anyone else, and I couldn't drive. I didn't have a license. I couldn't do it by myself. So he immediately set up a doctor's appointment for me, and we had to meet with my school, and eventually we met with the church and all this stuff. And I had been a pro-life advocate for a little while at that point, but it was very mild. Like, I just wrote essays and did a little research. It wasn't like much more than that. I feel like in small towns you can be very blind to what's actually going on in the world. And I had no idea the magnitude of abortion or the pro-choice industry or anything like that. And so I had known a lot about abortion, and I had beliefs about being pro-life, but they weren't. Like I said, I didn't have the knowledge that I had now, and I just knew when I found out I was pregnant. I just knew that this baby was a life that God had given me. And I knew that no matter how she had been conceived, it wasn't her fault. And that she didn't deserve to be sentenced to a crime that she didn't commit, but that her dad did. And I didn't know what to do because I was getting ready to move and go to college and finish school, and I had all this stuff going on in my life, and I just felt like it was the worst possible time in the world, but I knew that that wasn't a good reason to cut her life short, because again, it wasn't her fault. So that was never an option for me, even though it was terrifying. And right now, she's next to me rubbing my leg because she sees I'm crying, and it's just the most beautiful thing in the world. 3 weeks prior to my graduation, we started meeting with my school and my church, and for the first time, this church that had felt like my home no longer felt like a home to me. The guy who had assaulted me, his parents went to the church. He was not active there. And immediately the pastors were more concerned with covering up what happened and making the church look good than they were with what had actually happened. So in our first meeting, he had admitted that he had forced himself on me, and it was like they pretended they didn't hear it. And they were immediately starting to talk about marriage counseling. Wanted us to put on an image for the church, to walk in hand, to act like everything was okay. And when I told them I wasn't comfortable with that, my pastor told me that the worst thing I could do for my daughter was not let her father be a part of her life. And at a point when I was so scared and vulnerable, I didn't know how to rationally believe that he wasn't telling me the truth. So now I'm thinking that I'm an awful person for not wanting to be near this guy, and that I'm automatically a bad mom, even though I haven't even had her yet, and all this stuff. And it was very manipulative. And you grow up in a church knowing that you can trust your pastors, and that what they say is good, and that you're supposed to listen to them. And suddenly I didn't know what to do, because I didn't want to be in that situation, but I had so much shame, feeling like I was guilty for not wanting to listen to them. And it was like everyone at that church, as far as the board goes, not all the members, but they just suddenly acted like they hadn't known me for the past 10 or so years.
That's hard.
And yeah, it was like he said, it was like our home. We were so involved in that church, and everyone loved us there, and then it was like people wouldn't even
13 years.
People wouldn't even talk to us. And the members were, not all of them were great, but some of them were good. But the administration of the church, the board, just handled it really poorly, and they kept trying to force us to go into marriage counseling and things like that. And I kept expressing that it was something I didn't want to do, and he also expressed it. But again, I'm just like, I have to listen to my pastors. That's what I grew up learning. And the guy did not want to be a part of it either. Obviously, it's not like it was an intentional planning of having a kid. It was just, a mess. And so I remember all the times that I wanted to leave, I was condemned. And then one day he walked out of a meeting saying he didn't want to be a part of it. And my pastor just basically said, okay. And I just saw this stark difference because I was the image. I was the person who was pregnant. I was the one who was going to walk around with a baby, that I was the one that needed to act for the church. And eventually, after that point, I started to realize that what they were doing was wrong, and it wasn't me. We stopped agreeing to do any of the meetings and counseling that the church wanted us to do, and so they told me that I was no longer welcome there. So I got kicked out of my church, and I actually started going to my principal's church. He was the pastor of a very small church, and I fell in love with it. And we finished our time in Montana going to that church. And 3 weeks after all the news came out, I did graduate, and my mom showed up to my graduation completely unannounced. I didn't know she was coming. And no one knew I was pregnant other than the school board and my dad and my church. And none of the congregation knew it yet, and none of my classmates or anyone like that knew it yet. So it wasn't like public knowledge. So my mom didn't know her or anything, but she came, and I remember I was up on the stage and I saw her walk in with my siblings. And after not seeing her for 11 years, it was like the biggest shock in the world,
Sure.
But we were getting ready for the ceremony. I wasn't able to go talk to her yet or anything because we're, getting ready, and then we're going to do the walkthrough and all that. So the first time I actually saw my mom was mid-ceremony. We had this tradition at our school where we would give roses to our parents. And so the first time I saw my mom after 11 years was me giving her a rose, which I think is really special. And she was there when Addie was born, and so was my dad, and they actually got along, which was amazing. And, she's kind of in my life now. I mean, obviously there's 11-year gap of, distance that is going to take a long time to mend, if ever, but we still talk now, and every holiday we FaceTime, and Addie gets to know her, and I'm planning to visit her soon. And it's just like, not only did we get the best gift in the world, Adeline, but Adeline also brought a lot of other things together. It's just like God was like, here's a bunch of trials to go through, but I'm going to wrap it up in a pretty bow after that, And so Adeline, she is the best part of my life, and I think she is the main reason I was able to heal from my assault. I don't think I could have without her. And I think that's a really big point when we talk about women empowerment and abortion, and even people who say they're pro-life, but with the exception of rape and incest and things like that. It's just like, you can't look at Adeline and say that her life was not worth it. You cannot look at her and say that she would have caused more harm than good, because she has done nothing but brought healing, not only to me, but to my family. And even reaching as far as my mom, which who knew that would ever happen, And now we ended up moving to New York because I had been accepted into my school, and at that point I was like, well, I'm not gonna go because I'm a mom, but my dad decided to come with me so that he could watch her while I was in school. So we're still living together, and I was able to graduate this last May, and from my dream college, and I was dealing with a newborn the whole time. I was the first mother to ever attend that school, and I was able to do that, and then immediately when I graduated, COVID came. Actually before graduation, I finished my semester online because of COVID, and so I haven't been able to get out and start doing what I came here to study, which was theater. But we're making films, and we're set to film, our next one hopefully this summer. And, Adeline's almost 3 now, and as far as everything with the guy's side of the family, they tried to be very manipulative and controlling at first. Not him, but his parents. He could care less. He wanted nothing to do with it. But his parents really wanted to manipulate, and they wanted to even try to get custody themselves of Adeline.
Oh my gosh.
And it was a big old mess. But now they have no rights to her whatsoever. He doesn't have any rights. They tried to do a lawyer thing. We eventually talked to authorities, and I eventually reported what happened. And I talked to a detective, and she told me that she would have to interview, before she could press charges or anything like that. And the thing was, when the assault happened, there was no one else there, so it's not like there's witnesses. So the only witnesses that were unbiased would have been my pastors, because he admitted it to them in that first meeting. Because my dad and I are biased, and him and his parents are biased, so they were the only reliable source that could have brought any clarity to the case. And she told me after we moved to New York, actually, that the case had taken so long because they refused to see her for a while unless they could get a team of lawyers in their room, and then they completely denied all allegations. So they lied, and they told the detective that he hadn't said that, even though he had said it to them. And so nothing ever happened with that. But they had gotten a lawyer to try to do custody, and their lawyer was basically like, it'd be wise of you to drop the charges, because there's no way you're going to get that kid, and you can make things a lot worse. And so they finally signed off their rights, and so Adeline's safe, everything's good, and they're not part of our life anymore, thankfully. And we're in New York, and we actually moved upstate after I graduated, and like I said, we're working on films and stuff, so it's all, a complete turnaround. If you would have told us in the midst of all that we'd be here right now, I don't think we would have believed you. But God's definitely done this a lot in our life. We've gone through a lot of crazy things that a lot of people, don't necessarily go through, and yet God has come through in every part of it. And like I said, Adeline's the best part of my life, and she's just over here giving me hugs and kisses, and making sure I'm okay, because I'm was getting emotional. And I don't think there's a greater cause in the world than speaking up for people like her, for the rights of children that are taken every day. And so before COVID came, we were active pro-life speakers, which was new, and we spoke at a lot of different clubs and different speaking engagements. And so now that's my main passion, other than acting and giving the message through that, is speaking the message of pro-life. And one of our future films is actually that story, kind of like a sequel to T2, which is going to be called She's Not an Exception.
Amazing. Yes, your story, first of all, you're right. You've gone through so much just in the short time you've been on earth here, Kristi, than most people have in their whole lives. And it's, because God is so good, it's only strengthened you, even though you couldn't see it. His hand, maybe in every single situation. He's definitely faithful to show you later, especially with little Addie. But when you guys moved to New York, it didn't stop there. I mean, I remember the struggle that you had just living sort of like in a, like almost like a warehouse, the top of a little poor like church, in Manhattan, and just going through the struggles and going through the motions. I'm so blessed that the Lord brought you in my life. I knew we had a special connection the moment you guys walked into our church. And I think the other thing that's worth bringing recognition to is the fact that we should not be putting churches and pastors on pedestals. Now, I love our church that we met at, but I had, an experience in a different ministry where I was treated quite differently than than I was at the loving church in Manhattan at Harvest, So, it's amazing how the enemy could use people in ministry to hold you captive in a place because you're too afraid, because you assume that they are ambassadors for the Lord and that everything that they say and everything that they do is law,
Yeah.
And so I'm glad that you mentioned that. It's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, since we've started speaking too, we found out that that's more common than we would have ever thought. We've had a lot of people message us or tell us in person that they've experienced similar things in churches, and it's a terrible thing because we know that the church is supposed to be God's people, and we're not wanting to condemn church. That's a godly thing. It's a godly organization. God established it. And, if you find a good church, you should go to it. We really have to focus on keeping our churches accountable, keeping our pastors accountable. And I think that's something that's gotten lost in a lot of churches.
Oh, yes.
Vanessa, when we first met you, that was pretty much in the beginning of this, and we were in that warehouse thing because we got ripped off on a Craigslist scam for a apartment. But we were just feeling like we were doomed. It was like, we know Christ loves his church. And so we thought when we left on a bad note, it seemed like our church that we loved for 13 years. Like something was wrong. It must have been our fault, especially me. My whole first half of my life, I just, before I was saved, was just one reckless, sinful behavior after another. So if anything's wrong and I'm in the room, it's usually my fault. So we came to New York basically like our tails between our legs. Like we must have really screwed this up somehow. And it wasn't until Kristi got asked to speak, and then she mentioned, our role about the movie, and they premiered our film, and then I got asked to speak on fatherhood while Kristi spoke on pro-life.
Wow.
And it was then that other people started coming out of the woodwork telling us they had similar experiences with churches that they loved. Just sweeping it under the carpet, to still look good. And it took a while before we realized we weren't the bad guys here.
Yeah.
We got kicked out of church. That's horrible. Who ever heard it? It's not like getting kicked out of a bar. Getting kicked out of church, is bad.
Yeah.
So it felt that way. And we have social media, and we're posting about our films. And I'm going to say something. I ran into that pastor before we came to New York. We worked out at the same gym in Montana. And he was like my buddy, too. He become my friend. And we were talking about Kristi's situation. And he said to me, if Kristi is not willing to follow pastoral advice, then she's not going to be welcome at this church anymore. And I said, are you kicking her out? I asked him point blank, are you kicking her out? And he said, well, she's not going to be allowed to come. And then he turned it and he said, but you can still come. Like I'm sure I would come and leave my daughter at home.
Yeah, when he kicked me out, he didn't tell me. He told my dad to tell me that I couldn't come.
Yeah. Well,
Coward.
Yeah. Recently, between Thanksgiving and Christmas, out of the blue, I got a phone call from him. And we've had the social media announcing our new film, her story that she just told. She's not an exception. It's basically caught in the crossfire of the politics of church, and also pro-life. And, there was some quotes. We didn't point a finger at the church. We didn't even mention that the story took place in Montana. We're trying to be, we're not trying to slam anybody or anything.
Yeah.
But he said, now you're not going to tell that story, are you? And I'm like, well,
we are.
I go, yeah, Kristi has the right.
Pivotal moment of your life, right?
Yeah, Kristi has the right to tell her story. And he said, well, even if you change the name of the church and change everybody's name, people that know you here are going to know it was this church. And I said, what's the point you're trying to make? And he just said, well, you can't. He's trying to talk me out of making this movie.
Yeah,
because
he's scared now.
Without admitting that he's wrong still. I couldn't believe it. Almost threatening, like, well, it's not the right thing to do, Like, it was just so weird. The weirdest thing. So that's when I knew that God really wants us to do this.
Yeah.
Adeline brought a lot of power. The story I told in the beginning of this interview, of missing out, of the first 3 years of my daughter's life. And then what does God do? I'm standing in the room watching my granddaughter be born, and I've been in her life every day, and she's about to turn 3. God gave that back to me. Made us more powerful as a family, and he gave me the Take Two. I'm back in the movie business, but now I'm making true life redemption films, for His kingdom. It's not to make movies for me anymore. It's to make movies for the Lord. And our whole family's involved, even little Adeline. I mean, we're just all involved in what we're doing. God did that for us. That wasn't us. That wasn't us being so smart and crafty. That was what God did. And so, I mean, I don't know if your viewers want to look at our website to see what we're doing, or if you want me to mention that.
Yes, please share everything you're doing now, and where everyone can find your films, and what the next move is, I guess.
Well, with our distributing company that distributed our first film, they really were impressed with my next 3 screenplays. And I wrote a lot of screenplays during COVID. That was another blessing. I wrote more. Last year was my most productive year in development I've ever had. I wrote 5 scripts, and 3 of them I submitted to our distributors, and they loved it so much that they gave me a 3-picture deal. So so they're all listed on our website, which is, you have to remember, Movies with a Mission. So MWM. And Jesus is our cornerstone, our rock. So our website is mwmcornerstone.com.
Amazing.
mwmcornerstone.com.
And if you're there, you can click on the film posters, and that will lead you to all the individual films.
Amazing. Well, I'm praying that these, your movies reach multitudes, because they're stories that deserve recognition, deserve to be heard. God's going to get all the glory for it. And, if one little child is saved through your story, then it's worth it all.
And I know that there will also be a lot of hate and criticism. I've already gotten a lot of hate and criticism on social media, especially. But with all of that, I just know that every day I look at Adeline and I know that I made the right choice. I can't ever think otherwise. So, and I know that when people see her, they know that, because, you see Adeline, who's such a light, and you think of that would have been the child that I would have killed. That's the child that wouldn't be here anymore. And to tell her that her life wasn't worth it because of how she was conceived would be a tragedy. So people see her and they see me, and I like to talk about women empowerment a lot, because, like I said, I was the only mom to go to my school, and so many abortion-minded people try to paint the picture that you either have a baby and your life is ruined and it stops, or you can go have an education and a career. It's not both. And so I am very strongly trying to point out the fact that I did both. And it's not because I'm so powerful and amazing. It's because all women can do that. All women can raise a baby and have a career and a life and go to school if that's what they desire to do. And there's no reason why they can't. So I think that's a huge message that my story specifically has, that's unique to us, compared to perhaps other pro-life stories.
Right.
And she's just 21 years old, and she's on fire with all this.
Yeah, I know.
21 years old. And it's amazing. But also, Vanessa, when we're facing crowds like this, you got to keep in mind, and everybody who's listening, please pray for this. We're facing a bloodthirsty enemy. You know, there's people that just are screaming for abortions. And they're not even involved. They're not even having one themselves, but yet they're standing there, wanting to get in your face and fight you back, like anger, like I have not imagined. It's just unbelievable. And but there's also the good fruit, because even our film Take Two, it's now been dubbed in foreign languages and it's being played around the world. And we have gotten reports of people who have come to the Lord watching that movie. Some of them were similar, had custody struggles going on with ex-spouses or whatever the reason was, had situations with kids that it wasn't working out, and they saw a movie and it brought them to the Lord and something changed. And we get reports of these total strangers, we don't even know. And that's just, I mean, if that can happen, that's our prayer. We don't know who, we're planting seeds with, but God does. And that's what we're hoping with everything we're doing, that it just grows his kingdom.
Amen to that. Hallelujah. And I saw a quote on your social media the other day, Kristi. I think maybe one of your friends posted it. It was a really profound quote. And it said, abortion doesn't unrape a woman, something along those lines. And I mean, how true that is,
Actually, I posted that on our film page, but it's true. Like I said, it's the best thing that helped me heal was Adeline, and one of the most tragic things that I know is, in Planned Parenthood, they have journals, and after the women get their abortions, they go and they're able to sit in this room for a while, and most of them write in the journals, and if you read those journals, they're almost all immediate regret.
Yeah,
and
I've
so
heard that.
It's just it's the biggest tragedy. It's the biggest anti-women program in my opinion. And it's killed millions of babies, and it's horrific.
So what was it like? And we've got a few minutes here, so I'm just trying to kill the time now because you've shared your whole story. But speaking of school, what was that like when you shared it with your teachers and stuff? Because you're probably your school is probably all
very, very liberal, yes. And pro-choice. Yeah, actually, I think it was a big testimony too, because my teachers all knew that I was pro-life. It was very, it was said multiple times, and there were discussions. It wasn't only just a passing comment at times. We had discussions, and they made it clear that wasn't their opinion, but they also made multiple comments about being in awe of Adeline and of my story. And so I think even if they had hard exteriors, I think on the inside God was working. And one of my friends specifically, and she was my closest friend in college, I remember she came up to me once, and this is the biggest moment I've had as far as being a pro-life advocate, other than my own story, is she came up to me once and she was like, "Kristi, I think I might be pregnant." And I talked to my best friend, and she basically just told me, "Oh well, deal with it." And she was terrified. And most of the women who get abortions are just terrified, and a lot of them are being forced into it, even if they don't want it, by the baby's father or by their own father most of the time. And she just said, "I don't have anyone else, and I don't want to go to the clinic alone. Will you take me?" And I remember being like, "Gosh, that's the worst question you could have ever asked me, because that's the last place on earth I want to be, is inside of Planned Parenthood, like knowing that that's happening. Like, that's the worst thing in the world." But I looked at her and I knew God was telling me that the best testimony I was supposed to be to her was loving her. Because thing that a woman needs when she's that scared, because I've been there, is just love. And that's what my dad gave to me when he came into my room that day, and that was so powerful. And I just remember looking at her and saying, yes, I would. And she wasn't pregnant. We found out before that even ever had to happen. But I just remember thinking that, yeah, I would be sitting in the waiting room praying to God that you would change your mind the whole time, and I would be really emotional and I'd be very upset about it. But I would make sure that I was there for you, and I would make sure that you felt loved, and I'd make sure you got home safely. And I just remember, like, that is the testimony that we are supposed to live as Christians, is to be loving in action, not condemning in words. And she just yesterday or the day before texted me out of nowhere saying that she thought it was so cool that I was the true meaning of pro-life, and she was telling her coworker about it. And that was like 2 or 3 years ago now, 2 years, I guess, that she first asked me that question, and now she's still talking about it with other people. And so I know that that's a testimony too. And that's how I'm proud of school for a lot of reasons, both for just completely other than Adeline, just proud of, being able to go to my school and all this stuff. But I know that one of the biggest testimonies I brought to that school was my pro-life testimony, and in a place where it's very anti, everything to do with that kind of stuff. It's very anti-Christianity, very anti pro-life and all those kind of things. So it was really cool to know that impact was made, even with just one person, let alone others.
Incredible. Well, Kristi, you are a remarkable young woman with incredible strength that is obviously given to you by the Lord. The Lord says we can do all things through Christ who strengthens us, and He is so evident in both of your lives. I'm so happy to know you both. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your incredible stories. I so look forward to your films. I saw the Take Two. It was amazing. We shared it at discipleship program last year. All the women were moved by it, and I believe that this is going to just touch lives. So thank you so much for joining us. And if you just want to stick around a couple of seconds after, you want to say bye to Adeline? Is she around? Or?
Abby, come here.
Say bye-bye.
Here, I'll hold you up so you can see. Come here. You want to say bye? Say bye.
Bye, sweetie pie.
Look, can you see?
I miss you.
Say nice to see you. Nice to see you.
I love you. I love you guys.
Love you too. Thank you, Vanessa, and thank you for hanging in there with us. We've been trying to do this for a while, so
all in God's timing.
All in God's timing, absolutely. God bless.
God bless you. Well, thank you so much, Faith family, for joining us again. What an amazing story, right? Please stay tuned for our next guest on our other episode of A New Creation, True Life Testimonies. God bless.